Where do we turn for hope? This being February 1st and the beginning of Black History Month, I want us to consider what wisdom and inspiration we can glean from the Black community and the Black church, because I think we can learn a lot from them about how to survive and stay sane in times like these. Not to say that what we're experiencing today is anything like they've experienced for the last 4 centuries. So I turned this week to the late, great Dr. James Cone, former Union Seminary professor in New York, Black activist, Black liberation theology. Cone often wondered, how in the world did African Americans survive and resist white supremacy for so long? And not just survive, but thrive and keep their sanity in the face of great odds and 400 years of terror and violence. How did they do it and stay sane, he wondered. The answer, he believed, has to do with both their faith in God and their faith in themselves that kept them emotionally and spiritually healthy enough to not only love themselves, but to even love white folk still. What an amazing ethical accomplishment, he marveled. Consider this, and this is truly amazing, I think. Whites used Christianity to wield white supremacy, and blacks used it to resist and dismantle white supremacy. But there was something really unique about Christianity that made it a powerful tool of resistance for the Black community. I'm speaking, of course, of the cross. And again, this is Dr. James Cone's point, too. If it wasn't for the cross, Cone argues, Christianity wouldn't have been much use for Black folk. In other words, if the gospel wasn't about a lynched and crucified Messiah, a lynched and crucified God, a lynched and crucified peasant who was part of an occupied and oppressed people, right? A man who stood up for the poor and powerless and suffered because of it at the hands of both the religious and political authorities of his day, and ultimately was lynched and crucified for making himself an object of scorn in their eyes because he was labeled an anti-establishment agitator. Again, by both the religious and political authorities, by both the chief priests in Jerusalem and Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor of Judea, labeled an anti-establishment agitator, a rabble-rouser, a riot instigator, because he took up the cares and concerns of the least of these, the poor and the powerless, and preached a message of radical love, radical inclusivity, radical justice for the poor, for the marginalized, for the infirm, for the afflicted, for the so-called nothings and nobodies. He caught hell for this at the hands of the powers that be, right? If it wasn't for these facts about the story that we find in the 4 Gospels, then Christianity wouldn't be as much use as it is for the Black community. And the cross wouldn't mean what it means for them. It was the cross that made all the difference, because the cross was a 1st century lynching. It was a 1st century lynching, the crucifixion. As Acts 10:39 says, and they put him to death by hanging him on a tree. That's scripture, Acts 10:39. Hear that again. And they put him to death, meaning the powers that be, by hanging him on a tree. Because of passages like this, James Baldwin once remarked, James Baldwin being, of course, another Black activist artist from the Civil Rights era, who wasn't a Christian, by the way. He was an atheist. But Baldwin once remarked, whites discovered the cross by way of the Bible. Black folk discovered the Bible by way of the cross. Do you hear that? This is the great paradox of the cross. Both Cone and Baldwin argued finding God in suffering. Finding God in our God-forsakenness.